2023. Sorry, I'll put my mic on. Yeah, cheers, Nathan. Before we start, I would just like to outline some housekeeping rules. There are no planned fire alarms, so if the alarm does sound, please leave via the nearest exit, which is at the end of the corridor. Please, can I also ask for all mobile phones ideally to be switched off, otherwise on silent. This meeting is being recorded and live streamed via Chorley Council's YouTube channel. To facilitate this, can I request that when you are speaking, you use the microphone in front of you, which can be activated by pressing the button on the right-hand side. Once you are finished speaking, please ensure that this is turned off. My name's Councillor Matthew Lynch. I'm the Chair of the Licensing and Public Safety Committee, and I will ask everybody, starting on my right, to introduce themselves.
I'm Councillor Gordon France. I'm the Councillor for Chorley North East.
I'm Councillor Gray, Councillor for Exton.
My name's Tracy Bizassi. I'm Customer Services Manager for Enforcement.
My name's Usman Gazra, Enforcement Officer, Chorley Council Licensing.
My name's Azima Sultana. I'm an Immigration Officer.
Good evening, everyone. My name's Nathan Howson. I'm the Licensing Team Leader for Chorley Council.
Over there we have,
Claire Gornall, Democratic Services Officer.
and we also have a representative from Chorley Council's IT department. Obviously with YouTube and all the technology that's going on, very much needed is that support, I think. Can I ask yourselves to introduce yourself, please?
My name is Muniruddin from Daisy Takeaway.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Mohammed. I'm from My Solicitors. I'm representing
Alex Jackson, Legal Officer.
Thank you. We go agenda. Apologies.
We have apologies from Councillor Moss, Chair.
Thank you. Declarations of interest. If a member has a pecuniary interest, they must withdraw from the meeting. Normally, you should leave the room before the business starts to be discussed. You do, however, have the same right to speak as a member of the public and may remain in the room to enable you to exercise that right and then leave immediately. In either case, you must not seek to improperly influence a decision on the matter. Does anybody have any declarations of interest? No. Please do speak up if you feel that you do at any point. Item 2, procedure. The hearing will proceed as follows. The committee will first decide whether to allow persons specified on the Regulation 8 notice permission to speak. Then, our licensing officer, Usman Gazra, will outline the application and any relevant representations. Questions to the licensing officer will be from committee members, the applicant, responsible authority, and then the premises licence holder or representative. At this point, the committee will hear representations from the applicant for review, Nathan Howson, questions to the applicant for review from committee members, responsible authority, the licence holder, and representative. The committee will then receive representations from the responsible authority. In this case, is it Miss Sultana? Miss Sultana from Immigration. Questions to the responsible authority from committee members, the applicant for review, premises licence holder or representative. The committee will then receive representatives from the licence holder or representative. Questions to the licence holder from committee members, the applicant for review and responsible authority. I will then invite the applicant for review, Mr Housen, responsible authority, premises licence holder or representative to sum up in turn, if they so wish. The public and any other persons or officers who are not directly supporting the committee will then be excluded from the meeting at this point as we enter deliberations. The YouTube stream will end. Following deliberations, we will request that the licence holder re-enter the meeting so that we can deliver our decision. The licence holder, applicant for review and other persons will be issued with a detailed notice of decision within 5 working days after this hearing. So we go on to item 3, review of premises licence. Daisy Tandoori, 44 Steely Lane, Chorley. First point of business, the committee need to consider whether to allow persons specified on the Regulation 8 notice permission to speak. Husband, have there been any requests?
The only request is from the solicitors for Mr Udin and Mr Hussain.
Therefore, I take it that was fine, everything in time, no issue.
Yes, Chair.
Right, therefore, can I have a proposer and
I propose it, Chair.
seconder? Thank you very much. In that case, we will hear from Mr. Sorry, I do apologise. Mr. Udin, is that correct? Right, thank you very much. Right. I do apologise. Therefore, can I ask the licensing officer to outline the application and relevant representations?
Thank you, Chair. Chair, as you've just mentioned, this is an application for a review of a premises licence under the Licensing Act 2003. Basically, it's to advise members of an application for the review of the licence, namely the premises Daisy Tandoori, located at 44 Steely Lane, Chorley. It's also to request that members give due consideration to the application and any relevant representations and take such steps as are considered appropriate for the promotion of the licensing objections. Chair, moving on to point 4 on agenda page 5, licensing objections are prevention of crime and disorder, public safety, prevention of public nuisance and protection of children from harm. Members are reminded that the duty of the licensing authority is to take steps necessary to promote the licensing objectives in the interest of the wider community and not those of the individual licence holder. Chair, moving on to page 6 of the agenda, item number 8. I'll just go into the background of the premises licence. The premises have been licensed in the name of the current premises licence holder's name since November 2005. A copy of the current premises licence is appended at Appendix 1, which is attached to the agenda on page 9. Application for the review of the licence was received on the 24th of January 2023. It was received from Mr Nathan Housen, Licensing Enforcement Team Leader for and on behalf of the Licensing Authority of Chorley Council. A copy of the application is appended Appendix 2, again with the agenda on page 13. And is concerned with the prevention of crime and disorder objective being undermined at the premises. The grounds for the review are as follows, and I'm sure Mr Housen will give you further details when he's been given the opportunity to speak. But the brief is the licensing objective of the prevention of crime and disorder has been undermined at the premises in that a person who was not permitted to work in the United Kingdom by reason of his immigration status was found to be working on the premises, there was another person found to be who was working in breach of his immigration bail conditions. Copies of the information received in relation to the visit undertaken by the Home Office border agency officers and previously issued caution by Chorley Council is also appended at Appendix 2B and 2C, which is attached to the agenda again on pages 21 and 23. The application was advertised in accordance with the regulations in that a notice was displayed at the premises and also at the council offices, and a copy of the application was published on the council's website for the whole 28-day consultation period. In response to the consultation with the responsible authorities, Home Office Immigration Enforcement made a representation to the review application, and a copy of the representation is also attached at Appendix 3 on page 25. Chair, moving on to the, again, on page 6 of the agenda, item number 16, the licensing objectives which members must have regard to and refer to in the body of the report, as well as other considerations such as National Section 182 guidance and the Council's local licensing policy. The premises licence holder enjoys a right of appeal against any decision to revoke, suspend for up to 3 months or attach conditions to the premises licence, as well as other adverse decisions such as removal of the DPS. The licensing authority which sought the review also has a right of appeal to the Magistrates' Court. Chair, that now concludes my report. If there's any questions, I'll take the questions.
Questions? Just for everybody's knowledge. Obviously, you've referred also to the caution. Could you just provide a little bit more detail of that, please? Because
I haven't got much detail on. Sorry, Chair. I haven't got much detail on that, but I'm sure when Mr. Howson is reading his report, there'll be sufficient details in there.
that's fine. Councillor France.
Just a quick one, Chair. Obviously, it is alleged that the employer was paying these workers cash in hand. That can only be alleged, can't it? There's been no proof of that.
I think that's a question for the immigration officer, potentially. I mean, the matter here today, as I understand it, is more about the fact that the individual didn't have a right to work. So I think that's the biggest issue that we need to deal with, rather than whether or not the minimum wage was being enforced.
I think what that refers to is part of the intelligence which led to the operation. I don't think that's been substantiated. It's just, I think that's where it's come from.
Thank you, Nathan. Just one more question on nature. It is quite clear what documentation an employer needs to make sure a worker is entitled to work here. That is readily available for anybody who needs, that's quite an easy thing to check up on, I believe. Is that correct?
Well, hang on. These are questions to Usman. So I think what I will do is hang fire on that, because I've got my own point that I was going to ask along those lines. Right. But I think we'll put that to the right authority.
You will probably put that a lot better than me.
I'm not so sure. But anyway, right. Therefore, Nathan, have you got anything to ask?
No questions, thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Ms Sultana, any questions?
No, thank you.
Okay, thank you. And any questions?
No questions at the moment, but if I may, I'll address most of the points in my submission.
No problems. Thank you very much. Therefore, moving on to item 5, can I ask Nathan to make his representations as the applicant for the review?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm in the unusual, or semi-unusual position of appearing before you on behalf of the licensing authority as a responsible authority. So usually I'd occupy that place that husband does. On this occasion, that's not the case. We're bringing this review on behalf of the licensing authority in partnership with Immigration Enforcement. They've made a representation and they're here tonight to support this review. The review's been brought as a result of the premises being the subject of an immigration visit, and it's alleged that the premises is undermining the licensing objective of the prevention of crime and disorder. I'll be fairly brief in what I've got to say in terms of my oral evidence. The details of the case itself are contained in the review application, and I think it's essential reading for members of the committee when coming to that decision that they read the circumstances in that review. The details is that a targeted immigration visit to the premises was carried out on the 21st of October 2022. That revealed 2 persons on the premises who were not entitled to work in the UK. One was an overstayer. That person was arrested and removed, or removed from the premises, I should say, not removed from the country. There was another person who had an outstanding application to be determined by the Home Office, and that person is entitled to be in the UK, but isn't entitled to work in the UK. I'll leave the detail of that visit to Azima to give you the sort of circumstances of that and exactly what went on as a person who was actually there. I want to pick out a few pertinent points from the application, and some of that has been referred to already. At agenda page 21, there's an email from Immigration which shows in 2013 there was another overstayer who was arrested at this premises while it was still under the control of the current premises licence holder. And I know Azima will be able to give you an update in relation to that person. But I draw your attention to that to point out that this isn't an isolated incident. It has happened in the past. Now, it appears that, the follow-up licensing, the follow-up licensing enforcement didn't happen on that occasion, but it doesn't undermine the case today that this is a second occasion, although over a long period of time, that somebody who isn't entitled to work in the UK has been found to be working on that premises. At agenda page 23, there is a copy of a simple caution which was administered to the premises licence holder. That's in respect of an offence contrary to section 136 of the Licensing Act. That's carrying on unauthorised licensable activity. The circumstances of that were, in essence, that the premises licence had been suspended. The premises licence holder had failed to make payment of the premises licence annual fee. There was a number of fees which were outstanding at the time the suspension was made. One of those fees was paid, but one of the fees remained outstanding, and that's why the suspension took effect. The premises licence holder was found to hold himself out, was willing to supply late night refreshment when officers attended on the night in question. The premises licence holder did admit the offence, and that was taken into account when deciding whether to issue a caution, or when we decided to issue a caution rather than take formal legal proceedings against him. I'm drawing towards the end of my representations. Like I said, I wanted to be brief. I think during the rest of the hearing, you're likely to hear a lot about the decision not to issue a civil penalty. And I'm going to come back on that point in particular in my summing up once you've heard what I expect you'll hear from the premises licence holder themselves, and I'll deal with that in summing up. So unless there's any other questions, Chair, that's everything I've got to say at this point.
Thank you. Questions? Nathan. From the responsible authority side, what are the expectations on the licence holder that you would expect in regards to carrying out a proper process or when hiring people?
It's interesting, Chair, actually. when preparing for this review, I looked at the responsibility on a licence order for exactly that point. I expected it to be an offence to fail to check somebody's right to work, but actually I couldn't find anything that provided that. Maybe Azim will tell me otherwise. What I was able to establish is that where a person employs another person, who isn't entitled to work in the UK, they're liable for a civil penalty. And by being able to provide evidence that they have carried out a right to work check, that would discharge them from that liability for civil penalty. So it creates a statutory defence, basically, from the liability. So there's nothing from, and I might be wrong in this, but from what I could understand, that the responsibility, obviously you can't employ a person who isn't entitled to work in the UK, but the checking of documents it removes your liability from the enforcement of it effectively.
Right. So what you're saying is, because they said they've checked documents, that removes the liability, even though no?
Not quite. If they were able to demonstrate that they had checked documents, so the check is you either get access to a
List A, List B, all that kind of stuff, passport, driving licence.
Yeah, so there's a number of different ways that you're able to check,
Codes.
but you must be able to provide that document to demonstrate that you've carried out the check. It's not good enough to say, I have checked the
And
document.
is that something that you would see? Would you see evidence of that, or would that be immigration?
It would be for the person who is suspected of employing an illegal worker to provide, if they were able to provide to immigration or whoever the person was that.
So that's not
Who's
to
gonna issue
you,
it?
that's to immigration. Right, okay. I'm quite conscious that there's overlaps and there's gaps. And while we test these where the gaps are, you may be asked questions that may not be appropriate for you. Again, for everybody. So it's just a case of finding out. We'll come to you in a second. Right. Okay. Anything further? Councillor Gray, then Councillor France.
Yeah, what I can't understand is 2013, when you first called, why did they do it again? You'd have thought, well, myself personally, I wouldn't have done it again, because I knew the circumstances, what would happen. And I just can't understand, and I'd like to explain that to me, why they didn't,
We'll get to the premises licence holder in a bit. But is there any questions for Nathan?
No.
Councillor France.
I think this is probably a question for you. It's just to do with the overstayer. Obviously, it's the premises holder's responsibility, if his documentation is current at the time he takes him on, to obviously note when that needs to be renewed and make sure it is renewed if he continues in the employment with him.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, the duty is not to employ somebody who's not entitled to work in the UK. So that person might have a time-limited amount of time, or an amount of time that they're entitled to work in the UK, and then after that, then that lapses. It's incumbent on the person employing the other person to make sure that they are satisfied that before or during employing that person, then they are entitled to work in the UK.
Yeah, that makes sense, thank you.
So are you satisfied that the individual in question was employed at a time when they would have had a valid entitlement to work and it is expired, or are you unsure as to when that expired during the employment?
I think the key question today, Chair, is around employment. There is no doubt that the two people who were found at the premises, one was an overstayer and didn't have right to work in the UK. The other person was not, was subject to immigration bail and so was not permitted to work. So one person wasn't permitted to be in the UK, one person wasn't permitted to work in the UK. And I think the key question which will need to come out of this hearing is whether or not those people were employed at the premises, and I'm sure you'll hear evidence from both sides on that.
Okay. Yeah, go on, Alex.
Nathan, can you tell me what the current status of the licence is? So I noticed it was suspended, but has anything changed since the visit?
No, it was suspended some time ago. I think it was 2021 perhaps, but the fees were paid shortly after the caution was issued, and it remains a current licence now.
Any questions for Nathan, Mr. Altona? Okay, thank you. Any questions for Nathan?
Just going back on your point in relation to the licensee employing illegal immigrants, were further inquiries carried out to substantiate whether he was actually employing them in an employed capacity, or in fact paying them, whether it being cash in hand or through the books?
I think that's going to be the key question. I think I referred to that earlier on. Whether or not the persons were employed, I think is what the committee needs to determine, whether they're satisfied they were or not. If the committee is satisfied that those persons were employed, then clearly the licensing objectives are being breached, and they need to determine what action to take. So that's a question for the committee to satisfy themselves based on the evidence.
Okay. Right. Can I ask Mrs. Sultana to put forward her representations, please?
Sorry. So immigration enforcement, as Nathan had said, had visited the premises in October last year. The team had entered the premises roughly around, 10 p.m, just before 10 p.m. As we entered, the premises licence holder was at the front desk, and there was another male seen by myself and our colleagues that entered the premises first, just at the back of the kitchen area. As he'd seen us and we were explaining the licensing power of us entering to the premises licence holder, the other male disappeared out of the back. So under the licensing power, we have the power to just go in as soon as we've explained it. So myself and my colleague went straight to the back of the kitchen, and this male that we had seen had been in the garden. We'd seen him originally with an apron on. He's now stood in the garden with the apron off and scrunched up in his hands. So he's just stood there. As we brought him back, he was arrested straight away. And as we brought him back inside, there was another male in the next part of the back of the kitchen area. His apron had been discarded, left on top of the fridge. A hot cup of tea was still left on there. So both males were taken to the front, and my colleagues had then questioned them to find out what their immigration status was, where one male was found to be an overstayer and another male was found to be working in breach of his bail conditions. So the male that was working in breach of his bail conditions was then walked off of the premises after we did an illegal working interview with him, and the second male was arrested and taken to a police station, taken to a detention centre after that. Upon looking at his case in December last year, he has now claimed asylum, so he's an outstanding asylum case. He would still not be allowed to work with his outstanding asylum case. We had conducted illegal working interviews with all three males that were present on the premises, so the employer and the two males that were there as the employees. I think the representative had asked Chair about did we follow up with questions. So we did ask the employer questions about the illegal working employees that we'd found. So if I just bring this up, I can say. So we asked questions, how he knew the males there. He said he'd known them from Bangladesh. He's known them for 15 years. We asked him what they were doing behind the kitchen with an apron on. He stated they were making food. We asked, do they help make the food here? He then stated he lets them eat food here and doesn't charge them any money. He says that they've only come there today. He doesn't pay any wages, and he's told them not to help him with anything there, and just then reiterated that they had just come today for food and they arrived around 7 or 8 p.m. And they washed up the pots after they'd eaten. One of the males, we'd taken pictures of both males with their apron, one with their aprons and still in their hands, with food on their shoes. Their hands still had food on it. We've got all of that here. The civil penalty was decided not to be issued due to insufficient evidence, and that would mainly be all parties were denying that they were working at the premises. And that would be all.
Thank you. So I'm going to go to questions from the committee. However, first of all, I'd just like to get a few basic facts. So you refer to yourself and other officers. In total, how many immigration officers were there at the time?
Sorry, 1 second. Nine.
9 immigration officers.
9 immigration officers.
Okay. So when you entered the premises, obviously you've referred to the licensing holder, and you've referred to the 2 individuals that were detained. How many other members of staff were there at the time?
So initially we entered as myself and my colleague alongside 3 other officers.
Yep.
There were 2 officers on the rear. We
Right.
always have 2 officers on the rear of the premises. We always have, you know. So there was 2 officers on the rear. There was 5 of us in the premises, as there were mentors and mentees. So we always go in pairs.
Right.
And there was a spare. As soon as we'd gone in and encountered the 3 males,
So were there just 3 males behind the counter?
just the 3 males were encountered. That's correct.
And was the premises actually open for business at that time?
Yes.
Right, okay, thank you.
They-
Obviously, I'm not going to ask too much detail about intelligence. Clearly, this operation that you carried out was in response to intelligence received.
Of illegal workers.
Yeah.
That's correct.
So, can you, I'm just wondering if there is anything that you can say in regards to that. Was there a length of time set given, or, you know, these people have been here working for such a time, but obviously I'm conscious that the potential confidentiality.
So the main intelligence that we had was that there's an employer hiring illegal workers at the business premises of 44 Steely Lane, and that the employer is paying the illegal workers below minimum wage, cash in hand, and evading paying taxes.
Right, okay, thank you. I have a bit of experience with carrying out inductions for my own personal job, and one of the things that we do is a right to work form, and we do this for everybody. When questioned about what checks, what processes have been carried out, what did you find? Was anything presented to you? Was there any evidence? Was there, was the check codes given that they checked?
So we asked the employer if he asked for any documents of what their right to work would be there. to establish if they've had any entitlement to work, and he simply stated they only came to visit today.
So when the individuals were questioned, I presume that they were asked for ID. One, I think I recall that one had to be later identified. The identity had to be confirmed at a later point. Did that individual give a different ID, or did he just refuse to give ID?
That individual couldn't give us the spelling of his name, or he couldn't give us the date of birth correctly. So it took us approximately 45 minutes to find out who he was by searching different variations of his name and his date of birth on our systems before we came up. So he couldn't spell his own name or give us the correct date of birth.
Is that worrying that an individual can't spell his own name?
After being in the UK for 10 plus years, a little bit, but we do get it quite often.
Just, we'll get to you in a minute. Any further questions on those lines? Right. Okay. So the other individual, the one that didn't have the right to work, but was here legally, what was he forthcoming with all information?
So my colleague did the illegal interview with him herself, and no, he just basically said that he came, he helped out, made his food and watched a football game.
Okay.
He doesn't pay, sorry, it says here, what do you get for helping out? He says he doesn't pay me in money, I just have food. We asked how often he comes. He says 3 months or 1 to 2 months, and he gets the bus there.
Right. Question. Any further questions from committee? No. Okay. Thank you. Right. Questions?
Sorry, Chair, it was just on the point about the fact that it seems to come across very worrying that person can't spell their name. And I must emphasise it's not uncommon for somebody where this language is their second language, even though they might have been here for 10 to 15 years. I mean, just to give you an example, my mother, no disrespect to her, she's been here about 40 years, and she still struggles to spell her name accurately or even kind of write it down on a piece of paper, simply because they've not been through the education system or never had the opportunity to kind of learn the alphabets or kind of learn the English language. Often we have found, I mean, especially in our firm, we have a lot of immigration clients who's been here for a number of years, up to about 15 years. And again, when we ask them to spell their name and write it down on a piece of paper, they struggle, and it takes time for us to kind of identify sometimes who they are until some kind of identification is produced. So it's not something that is uncommon or should be worrying. And I'll kind of leave it to the committee to see how they kind of take view of that.
Just something that I've just thought of. When these people were interviewed, were they interviewed in English or were they interviewed in a language which was native to them?
They would be interviewed in their own language using a accredited interpreter that we have.
Thank you. Any further questions? Okay. Oh, I do apologise.
Sorry, Chair, just
Go on.
one point. If an interpreter was used at that point, why was it so difficult to kind of determine the spelling of that person's name, which again would be worrying on my part if the interpreter was able to kind of comprehend his native language, because there are various dialects in interpreting the Bengali language. One is Sylheti, one is the Shuddha, which is Dhaka. Again, we don't know that information, whether the interpreter was adequately capable of clearly understanding the language that he spoke.
So we do ask the interpreter to ask the person if they understand them clearly, and he stated he did understand her clearly.
Was the interpreter able to spell that name for you, or was it the actual person that you interviewed who then finally gave the spelling of the name?
The interpreter would give us their interpretation of someone's spelling of their name, but that could be any variation.
There you go, Chair. That's one thing I'd like you to know, that again, it's an interpretation of what the interpreter would have thought the spelling would have been. So again, they would have kind of gone through various spellings before it would have been determined whether it's the correct one. So I think it would be unfair to kind of emphasize on that point that they were either trying to be evasive in any way, shape or form, simply because of a language barrier.
Right, I'm going to get back to the order of the procedure. Nathan, any questions?
Just one very quick one, Chair. In your opinion, from what you saw on the night, were you of the opinion on that night, based on what you knew, that the two people were working, or did you? What was your opinion, basically?
So based on our visit and what we saw when we got there, we believe that the males were working at the premises.
That's me, thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Nathan. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, just for you, Chair. The person that you caught on the night, did the intelligence include any names of the persons found?
No.
Okay. Any further questions? Okay, thank you.
Is it possible
Alex?
Yeah, I don't know if this has already been covered, but did the two men who were suspected of working, did they say when they were interviewed that they were there just to help and they were being given food?
Yes, they did.
Just hang on. I'm just... Just to come back, I put a question forward to earlier about the... I appreciate that that there's an argument of whether they were employed or not employed. I appreciate that. However, in your view, if these individuals were employed, are you satisfied that at no point through their employment did they have a legal right to work?
Yes, that's correct. As one was clearly an overstayer, so we have never given him any status, so we would never have had the right to work. And the other male had an outstanding asylum with further submissions submitted, and that would mean he still has no right to work, and his bail conditions would clearly have stated that he has no permission to work in the UK.
Thank you. Okay. Yes.
Can I just ask one question? Just for quick clarification, there were only 3 people on the premises when you made your visit?
That's correct, yes.
Yeah.
These two individuals, were they residing locally or were they residing elsewhere?
So we did ask them where they were staying, and from my recollection, I think they said Bury.
Okay. Unless there's any further legal question, no? Okay, we'll move on.
Question, if I may
Yeah.
get your permission. I think one of the most fundamental point that is probably being overlooked here is if the responsible authority, as in the Home Office, was under the impression that these people found in the premises were in fact working on the balance of probabilities in their opinion, then surely, after consideration, then there would have been some kind of civil penalty imposed against the
Can we have
license
a
holder.
question?
So, but my question to that is, to Ms. Sultana, that if that was the case, that you were quite convinced that they were actually working in the premises, then why is it that no further action was not taken?
Unfortunately, I have no control of the civil penalties team, so we are simply the enforcement team. We just go and do the enforcement visit, we conduct the illegal working interviews, get as much evidence as we can together, and we present the case to the civil penalties team, and then it's up to them to decide what actions they want to
So
take.
what you're saying is ultimately on the balance of probability, on the evidence that was presented by yourselves, it was found that there was insufficient evidence to substantiate any allegation that they were actually employed in that premises, and as such, for that reason, no further action was taken. That's a point I just kind of want to kind of reiterate, if that's okay.
Can I just come back on that? Sorry about that, it's
Yeah,
like a supplemental question. I think what the solicitor for the premises licence holder was saying then is that it can be inferred that because no civil penalty was imposed, that must mean it's because there wasn't sufficient evidence on the balance of probabilities. Well, I mean, this isn't a prosecution, but I think those of us who work in the legal field know that with a decision whether to prosecute, there are two parts of it. There's whether there's the evidence, but there's also whether is the public interest. I don't know if you know the answer to this question, Ms Sultana, but is it the case that with a civil penalty that there's two aspects to it? The first is there enough evidence? But it is also the case, actually, there might be enough evidence, but it's not in the public interest because it's thought not large scale, for instance, and therefore that might be a reason why a civil penalty might not be imposed.
I couldn't say for definite, but I don't think that would be a factor in the civil penalty process of whether it'd be a public interest, as it's just the employer employing illegal workers, hiring people illegally, and basically going against the law.
So it would just turn on the evidence.
That's correct.
Okay. Right, let's move on. Representations from other persons. We don't have any other persons, do we? Therefore, we'll go over to Mr. Udin and his representative for their representations.
Come across slightly lengthy. This is my first time sitting in a committee panel like this, so my kind of preparation for this maybe might have just gone off at a tangent, so apologies in advance for that. But firstly, I'd like to just thank the panel for giving Mr. Munir Uddin the opportunity to provide a valid and legitimate explanation in response to the cause of action that led to this review. Now, notwithstanding the nature of the allegation, Mr. Uddin has at all times acted with honesty and integrity, and at all times ensured a full and frank disclosure. Now, one of the things that I'd like to highlight is Mr. Munir Uddin has been trading since 1995 and has been there for a long period of time, has built a reputable business in that area and within the local community. Now, it's been in the same ownership since 1995, and he's always operated, as far as what we've been advised and from what we've gathered, by the principles of business ethics, ensuring compliance with the rules and regulations in line with their legal obligations as a business. Now, I will go on to several other points in terms of that has been raised in the past regarding the issue that happened in 2013 and subsequent to that. Now, one of the key questions in this scenario is whether Mr. Udin has been employing illegal immigrants in his business premises. Now, if I may, Chair, pass you this piece of paper which has been prepared by the accountant, which shows clearly that he employs legitimate staff, all with national insurance numbers, and and he's paying the taxes in accordance to their employment. Is this something that I can pass over to you?
Chair, so just before that happens, if there's any documentary evidence to be provided, it needs to be provided in advance of the hearing. That hasn't been provided to any of the other authorities. So it's only with the consent of the other authorities that can be considered by the committee. If we can have a look at it, that's fine, but it should have been provided in advance.
No,
of the
my
hearing.
apologies. It was something that was just given to us at the last minute, but it does kind of confirm what our client's assertions are, that he does employ legitimate staff. And also our client is saying that the accountant who he was on jury service as well, and this is one of the reasons that there was a delay in kind of producing this document.
I mean, I can see there's a date on the 13th of March, so obviously it has been produced in advance of the hearing.
It would have been, it was written, but he kind of received it at a later stage, which is why it wasn't presented to us in time for us to kind of pass to the pass forward as evidence. So my apologies in advance for that.
Yeah, I mean, Chair, there's nothing I can say. There's no reason for you not to consider it. Obviously, it doesn't give us any opportunity to look at whether or not to investigate any of the things which are referred to in it. So it's down to the committee to determine how much weight, if any, they apply to this document, because there's no way for us to test it at this point.
Can I just make the comment that should this be accepted as a true document, this is only evidence of information that's provided to the accountant and nothing else?
I would kind of argue to the contrary, because the accountant does the payroll for that business, and as such, in a sense, it has to be valid information that's forwarded to the accountant in order for him to create a legitimate payroll where the taxes and the adequate national insurances are paid.
I understand the point that you're trying to make.
In any sense, if
And
it's
the
not
commi-
accepted as evidence, I accept that due to the
I
late
understand the
disclosure.
point you're trying to make. However, I will say to the committee that they do have an opportunity to ask questions, and on the basis that you have submitted evidence to say that there were people employed there, I am sure that some of the committee will ask how many of these individuals were working on the day in question. So I think that's only fair. But yeah. Right. If you'd like to carry on with your submission, please.
Now, I was kind of adding, kind of elaborating on the point in relation to employees. You know, Mr. Udin does operate a compliant payroll system, and he is registered with the HMRC PAYE scheme. Now, Mr. Munir Udin is diligent in his checks with recruitment. It's one of the points that was highlighted earlier during the discussions. He does ensure compliance with the codes of practice pertaining to the prescribed checks that employers are required to conduct to avoid civil penalties. Now, one of the most simplest things that somebody could check is to ensure that they've got national insurance, passports, and things like that. And we are advised that he does check for those items before he employs anybody. Now, notwithstanding, Mr. Udin has at all times complied with the licensing objectives, ensuring strict adherence to the requirements underpinned by the statutory objectives set out under Section 182 of the Licensing Act 2003. Now, the allegations which gave rise to the review is equally important that members of the committee and all responsible parties are given an explanation into the backgrounds of the events that transpired and the outcome of the visit made by the immigration enforcement agents on the 21st of October 2022. Now, it is averred, Mr. Uddin, that he has been subject to victimisation by competitors. This is one thing that I'd like the committee member to take into consideration. And now, what is meant by that is that there's competition in the surrounding areas, and often unfounded allegations are made in relation to businesses operating illegally, employing illegal staff, working unethically. And Mr. Uddin has at all time worked very hard to establish a sustainable business and works ethically and in accordance with legislation, policy and guidelines. He himself has contributed to the community and is not discriminatory in his disposition whatsoever. Now, whilst it is accepted that the agents witnessed 2 males behind the counter, again, it is reiterated that they were simply visitors of Mr. Uddin and they were not employed in any capacity whatsoever. Now, the licensing objectives relating to the prevention of crime and disorder does include the prevention of illegal working in licensed premises. However, this does not impede visitors of the licensee attending the premises socially. The Home Office did speak to the males who were present, who identified themselves and clarified their presence, corroborating Mr. Uddin's assertions. Now, Mr. Uddin is operating the premises with legitimate staff, members of the legitimate staff on the aforementioned date, and he had no reason or requirement for additional employees. The accountant letters that I've produced confirms that staff are employed by the business, albeit on a rotational pattern, and there are sufficient members of staff in terms of what their business needs are. In particular, Mr. Uddin was running the business on that night with his sous chef who had left the premises for a short visit to the shop. And on his return, what we are advised is that he was prevented from re-entering the premises by the agents of the Home Office. So again, there was 9, as Ms. Sultana clarified earlier, there was 9 agents from the Home Office who was present at the time, which is quite intimidating. But anybody who did turn up at the premises, did they take any other details, or were they just considered as customers, or were there any further information taken as to any other people who were trying to attempt to enter the premises? We are told that the sous chef did try to re-enter the premises. However, they were stopped from re-entering. Now, it is Mr. Uddin's contention that the agents of the Home Office were told that the males present, namely the 2 specific individuals, were simply visited who had authority to enter the premises, and the authority came from Mr. Uddin as they were visitors in the premises, and they were allowed to make themselves something to eat. Now, there is no rule, there's no legislation, there's no policy that prevents a visitor from entering a business premises and making themselves something to eat if they are friends or social visitors. Again, it was an allegation, and if anything had been substantiated in terms of them working there illegally, then further action would have been taken. I note from the Immigration Enforcement Officer's representations, it says here on the in the final statement, after consideration of all available information, an initial no action notice was issued. In other words, any of the allegations that was presented, nothing was corroborated, nothing was substantiated, and as such, no further action was taken. Now, in light of these findings, it is Mr. Uddin's contention that he did not operate in contravention of Section 182, 2.6 of the Licensing Act 2003, nor was found to be in contravention of the Immigration, Asylum and Nationality Act 2006 or the Immigration Act 1971. Now, it's further submitted that the caution issued by the licensing team on the 3rd of February 2020 relating to non-payment of licensing fee, which occurred in 2017, is again arguably unreliable. Now, while it is accepted that the payment was an oversight in 2017, the payments for all periods thereafter were paid in time, superseding the date of which the suspension applied. In any event, the suspension arguably should not have applied, having paid the fee for that period in 2020, thereby removing the suspension in accordance with Section 55A, 7B of the Licensing Act 2003. Now, in addition, the notice of intention to suspend was served out of time between the 3rd and the 6th of January, I believe, of 2020 for a retrospective period. So, and therefore, in our opinion, it would invalidate any cause of action under Section 55A 2A, as the council had failed to pursue action at the time due to their delay in serving notice. Now, in conclusion, we would respectfully submit that Mr. Munir is allowed to continue trading in the premises under the existing premises license, so as not to jeopardize his livelihood and also of his employees.
Thank you. Just for information, the committee, obviously, the statement that you just made about his livelihood and others' livelihood, that's not a consideration for the decision of the committee. So I would ask that you, I appreciate your comments, however, I would ask that they not be taken into consideration when you make your decision. There was a question in there, so I will just go back to Ms Sultana to clarify that. On the day of inspection, was anybody stopped or restricted from entering the property?
There was a male in the car in a car outside, who stated he's a delivery driver, but he never tried to physically come into the property. We were stood at the door and we stated the business is currently closed, so no other persons can come in, and we wouldn't ask people just that come out the streets for their immigration status.
Thank you. Okay. Nathan, would you like to sum up? Sorry.
We do questions
Sorry.
first.
Yeah, we will do questions first, Nathan. I do apologise. It's jumping ahead of the gun. I've got several questions, actually. Before I go to committee members. Again, just a bit of background information. Could you, other than the licence holder and owner, could you tell me what your role is within your business? Yep. Yeah, go on.
He operates there as the main chef, the head chef.
The head chef?
Yes.
So, is that the only role that he adopts?
Chef sir, आपने business आपने होता देखा सुधा करूँगी. Yeah, he overlooks the operation of the business in general.
And what does that mean?
इधर मानी किता आपने करूँ किता. Everything money किता. So he's responsible in employing staff,
Yeah.
and he does all the shopping for the business, and he runs the business himself.
Right. So those are the only roles. That's the only roles that you take on within the business. Is it?
Well, in relation to staff, he manages that aspect of things as well.
Right. So the three staff members that you've provided evidence for, what's their roles? So I apologise now for, two members of staff. So you've got, is it Fazer Khan? What's his role?
So he's the reception, takes the and also
Takes the orders,
takes the orders and works part time.
Telephone orders,
And
orders from. I presume it's not a sit-down restaurant. This is just a takeaway.
Yeah, it's an
so people off
over-the-counter
the street,
takeaway.
phone orders.
Yes.
Okay. Samir Khan. What's Samir Khan's role?
He's a general worker that kind of works alongside Mr. Odin.
So almost like an assistant chef, sous chef,
Yes.
whatever you want to call it. Okay. So obviously we've heard from the immigration officer that there was somebody outside claiming to be a delivery driver. What's his name?
বেটা বাড়া থেকে আমি এবার চেষ্টা করছি যে ডেলিভারি ড্রাইভার বলে করছি আমিনুর রহমান Okay, he's saying he wasn't delivering food. He was actually working inside the premises.
So
that
who's
night.
that individual?
Good name, kita? His name is Aminur Rahman.
Because I noticed that his name's not on this accountancy paper.
Yeah, the person that was outside who was trying to re-enter the premises
Yeah.
was employed on a temporary basis,
Right.
and that was his first night.
So does
Yeah,
he
it's his
not go
first
through
night.
that was his first night?
First night there, yes.
Oh, right, okay. So the gentleman that answers the phones and takes the orders, I'm right in thinking he wasn't there.
Get telephone order hall name. He had to do something staff of all. Tara idin to kakamo asil da. Kita lagi ito fasil da. Saying those two other members of staff were unable to attend that night,
Right.
and that's the reason why he had another member of staff who came in on a temporary measure.
The gentleman that's on his first night
That's right.
working.
Yes.
Right. That personally identified himself as a
Yes.
takeaway driver, not as a delivery driver, not as a chef or somebody who answers phones and was actually in the
But
car.
this is the assertion that Ms. Sultana is making, that he identified himself as a delivery driver. Is that something that was... Sorry.
If you direct the questions to
Sure.
me, I'm just trying to ask
Yes.
you questions at the
Sure.
moment. So the individual that's alleged to have identified himself as a delivery driver who sat in a car, your client is saying that he was working in the shop.
Yes. That's correct.
What chef?
So he's a better delivery driver. He immigration officer delivery officer. Okay. So he আপনার লগে ভিতরে খামই আছে। হে কিতা করতে খাম? Chair, what he's saying is that this gentleman has worked for him in the past 10 years ago. He does have experience to work within a kitchen setting as well. And his role would have been to help him as the chef in producing the orders.
So I'm right in thinking that the standard day-to-day business at your business is 3 men behind that counter.
মানে তো চেয়ারে একটা জিজ্ঞাসা জানে নর্মালি এভরিডে তিনজন থাকেনি তিনজন থাকে He says normally it's 3, but on that, due to kind of staff not being available, there was just 1, but normally there would be 3.
So there's
Or
just
it
one
could-
member of staff on duty.
On that day, it was 1 member of staff, but normally it would be 3, but on that specific day, there was only 2 available.
Right, so you said there's 1 member of staff on duty, but you have the head chef there
Yes.
and then a person outside, so that's not 1 member of staff, is it? Just for my clarity.
No, the head chef takes responsibility in terms of operating the entire kitchen area
Well,
with
there's
the assistance of others.
You said, just bear with me. You just stated to the committee that there was 1 member of staff on duty. Now, what I'm saying is, you've just, it's kind of a contradiction that you say you've got somebody outside and then somebody inside,
No,
so
no,
that's
no.
two members
No,
of
sorry,
staff,
if I
am
may
right?
clarify that
Mr.
again, I do
Udin
apologise.
and another.
Yeah. So on that specific day, what my client is saying is that he was working in the kitchen and there was one other staff member who was working with him, and that's the person who was outside,
Right, so two members.
including him too, yes.
Thank you.
Sorry, sorry, that's my...
Any questions, committee?
Yeah, my question still stands, what I asked before. What made him do it after he'd been caught in 2013 to do it again? Can he explain to me about that?
Okay. What my client is saying that going back to 2013 again, there was no person that was employed in that premises, or nothing was kind of substantiated in that sense.
So, sorry, go on.
Yeah, I wasn't actually asking that. I wanted to know why he did it again.
He did
After
what again?
2013, he's done it again, hasn't he?
Done what though exactly?
Employed illegal immigrant.
I think
But again, that's an allegation.
That's what I'm saying.
Well, that's an allegation. He's not employed. He still maintains the
it's
stance that
alleged,
he hasn't.
Councillor Graham.
Well, alleged,
Yeah.
put it that
And
way,
in
yeah.
2013, the enforcement visit that took place, again, it did not pursue any action against him in the same manner that's happened now, where no further action has been taken because nothing has been substantiated.
I've just got one more question. So you refer to the individual that had previously worked for you and you'd employed on a temporary basis. Even though he's on a temporary basis, could you just explain to the committee what processes you have as a business owner in place to make sure that anybody working for you has the correct documentation and the right to work?
Ze shumo afne iman she temporary hishabe zudiu khamoloi. Te endre enjene id kham korta paren right ase kham korbar lagi. Afne kita check korun. Okay, he says he checks his passport and his national insurance number.
Right. So you don't ask for a check code or anything like that?
Afne kono check code zikain. He's saying, what do you mean by check code?
So you issued a code, I'm sure you can explain in detail.
From my understanding, a check code is only issued if that person doesn't have sufficient documents to prove his right to work in the UK. And as such, you can go through an online system and it produces a check code. But if he's got a passport, then
So
there's no reason to
have
check
you
that.
retained copies of those passports and driving licences?
I'll just interpret what you said. He have a passport copy. Yes, he does.
Just bear with me. So, where do you keep those copies?
He keeps it in the takeaway.
So I'm just going to ask a point for clarification. Ms Sultana, when you carried out the inspection, was there any documentation offered or was there any documentation identified in relation to employees of the business and checks that had been undertaken?
No documentation was offered to us, and the two males didn't have any identification on themselves, on their person, to give us to say who they were. One of the males had his immigration paperwork photograph on his phone that he was able to show us, so we were able to find him easily, and as we know, the other male didn't have anything.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I've got Councillor France that wishes to ask a question. I'll let Usman come in when we get to the bit where you're allowed to ask a question.
Thank you, Chair. What I'm having a bit of difficulty with, I'm somebody that enjoys a takeaway meal. What I'm having difficulty with is seeing one member of staff function in the restaurant doing everything. I've never come across that before. Never. And this is somebody that's been going to various takeaways for 30, 40 years. But I've never come across anywhere where one member of staff, even for a limited time, could function doing front of house, taking orders, cooking, doing it all. I've just got a problem with that.
Have you got a
Well, the question is, was he the only member of staff on at that time?
Well-
Because I do have a difficulty with that.
Well, obviously, the information supplied it from Mr. Houdin was that there was 2 members of staff on duty that night. Obviously, we've got a counter argument that not only was the Mr. Houdin and the individual that was parked outside, but there was also 2 in there. So we'll discuss that under debate. Right. Any further questions from committee? No. Right. Just bear with me, please. Applicant.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I've got a number of questions, if I may. We heard a lot about the premises licence holder being a responsible operator and complying by all the codes of practice, and we heard that he regularly checks right to work of any staff member which works at the premises. Why was that evidence not provided? Well, I suppose to immigration officers, number one, obviously it's alleged that those people weren't working, but why would that evidence not be provided in advance of this hearing to show what a responsible operator he was, if that evidence were available?
I think that the key issue here is the emphasis has always been on the fact that Mr. Udin has employed illegal staff, and in specific to those 2 individuals that were found in the premises. And just as Ms. Sultana did also kind of mention that she mentions quite generally that no documentation was offered, but offered by who? The individuals, or were they not requested from the license holder? Now, up until now, the key focus has been on whether those 2 individuals were actually employed in that premises, and as such, it wasn't found to be necessary to provide any documentation in relation to those individuals because they weren't employed in any capacity whatsoever.
And
if that was the case, if that was the case, then maybe one of the questions that should have been asked from the licensing authority is that could you provide us with evidence of who you employ in the premises to prove that you are employing legitimate staff. Again, that wasn't something that was asked from yourselves as well.
And essentially, that's the question I'm asking is, you were aware that, or Mr. Udin was aware that the allegation was that he was employing staff unlawfully. If that evidence were available, why would you not proffer that evidence, if it were available, to say, look, I'm doing everything I can, here's the evidence?
I think Mr. Udin did make a concerted effort to provide that information, about it being late, which is why we produced this document now from the accountant.
But that's a document about people being paid. It's not proof of...
That again does
Can I
prove
just
that
say,
legitimate staff are employed within that premises.
This is not for 2 people to have a discussion. Can we just have all questions through the chair, please?
Yeah, sorry. So the proof of national insurance number doesn't prove right to work. A proof of right to work would be proved by an acceptable document or one of the other methods. None of that information has been provided. So I'm asking why not?
I think it's down to Mr. Udin to kind of respond to that. But from our understanding is the focus has been on the 2 individuals that were found in the premises, and as such he maintains his stance that, look, I didn't employ these 2 individuals. There was no reason for me to keep any documentation of those 2 individuals. They were simply visitors there, and as such I've not kind of breached any of the licensing objectives that are required of me, and that's the only reason that can be provided.
Fine. I'll move on to my next question, if I may. There was conversation about, or part of your representation was that there was some businesses are subject to malicious complaints and things like that. Is that the case here? Are you saying that this is a malicious complaint? Because it was mentioned as sort of a
Yes,
general point, but
the
I want to
reason
know
why
whether
this
we're
was
saying it
mentioned is because there was an incident that occurred in 2013, and it seemed to have resurrected again only recently in 2022. Again, that suggests that if there's repeat enforcement visits, and following these visits nothing is substantiated, then clearly these allegations that are being raised are raised with malicious intent to cause harm to the business. Because if Mr. Uddin was found to be employing illegal staff, then surely by now there would have been enough evidence to have substantiated the allegations that have been made against him. And as such, that it can only be considered as being malicious. And yes, there is, it is a competitive market out there, especially in the curry sector. And often it is not uncommon that, you know, unfounded allegations are made against each other, you know, just to cause, you know, disrepute to that business. And by the enforcement agents attending on that night with 9 agents closing the business down, it doesn't portray a very good image if there was any customers walking by. So why that would happen, again, you know, it's something that is of Mr. Uddin's opinion, that, look, if I'm continuously having visits and nothing is found, clearly it's malicious, and these allegations are made by somebody who's out there to jeopardise his business.
You accept...
Just bear,
Okay.
just for a point of clarity, I'm going to go back to Ms Sultana, because again, there was a comment made. In reference to inspections from immigration from 2013, do you have the information as to how many inspections the premises has been subject to?
So from what I can see, there were 2 in 2013. One was conducted on the 1st of August 2013, and the second one, where we encountered a male working illegally and he was arrested, that was conducted on the 27th of June 2013. Sorry, I've got the dates the other way around.
So from the 2013 date to the current date, there has been
No further immigration enforcement visits, no.
Right, thank you.
Sorry, can I just add?
Yeah.
I don't know why you're flashing.
Green, there.
Yes.
Just to clarify on a point that the representative made, there are 9 officers on the visit, but not all 9 officers were in the premises at the same time. At the most, we always work in pairs, so each person will have a pair with them. Myself, I was the officer in charge. At the time, I was being mentored, so I had my pair with me as my mentor, and I was the mentee. And then we had 2 other pairs in there speaking to the other 2 males, and another pair speaking to this male here. So not all 9 officers were in there. There was a pair to each person there, besides myself, that was in charge.
No, Chair, that the nature of the businesses and the setup of the businesses is an open kitchen, so anybody stood from the window can even see what's going on. So it's not exactly very discreet, the operation, or it wouldn't have been exactly discreet. If it was a restaurant, for example, and all everything was being carried out, you know, behind, you know, closed doors, then you can understand that. Look, yes, it wouldn't kind of affect any customers walking by.
I am sure, in the current climate, that the immigration service have a very difficult job to do.
Absolutely, yes.
I appreciate the sentiment that you're trying to say. However, they have a job to do.
Absolutely.
You know, without rushing to any judgment, it seems to me that it was a well-planned, well-coordinated, and something that doesn't appear to be outside of the norm for what they do. So I appreciate your sentiments, however, you know, I also appreciate
No,
that
no, absolutely.
these people have a job
I
to do.
respect their position, and absolutely, it's a job that they have to do. But what I was trying to kind of elaborate on there was the fact that there is, on my point in relation to kind of the competition and the malicious intent, that if allegations are being raised and they've kind of acted upon intelligence, then that intelligence in itself seems to be kind of malicious in terms of causing disrepute to the business, and that was the point that I was trying to make.
Okay.
And it was nothing in terms of their conduct or the way they approached anything.
I'm sure the committee will take those comments on board. Any further questions, Nathan?
Yes, Chair, I've got a couple more, and I just want to sort of labour the point that although there are, what is being alleged is that this is a malicious, or these are malicious complaints. There's no evidence of that, and I'd invite the committee to place no weight on the fact that this is a malicious complaint. On a couple of occasions, it was mentioned that the business works in compliance with the law, but we've heard that Mr. Rudin was issued with a simple caution, and that on a number of occasions there have been overstay, or certainly on the first occasion there was an overstayer found. So how do you square that circle of saying, on the one hand, we work in compliance with the law, but Mr. Rudin has accepted guilt in accepting a formal caution after having the benefit of legal advice, and still accepted guilt, but says he works in compliance with the law?
Yeah, so this caution, just to kind of specify what this caution related to, was the non-payment of the annual premises licence fee, I believe it was.
The caution relates to carrying on unauthorised licensed activities. The premises licence was suspended because of non-payment of the licence fee.
So it relates to the non-payment of the licence fee, which then kind of subsequently relates to the non-compliance of the licensing objectives.
Hang on, I think we need a point of clarification here. So, yeah.
Let me take it from the top. So every year the premises licence is the subject to a premises licence annual fee. You must pay the fee, otherwise the law requires us to suspend a premises licence. We have to serve a notice in order to suspend the premises licence, and that has to be served, or has to give 2 clear working days notice. Now, the circumstances are that in 2017, payment wasn't made. At that time, the council wasn't particularly proactive in chasing up those fees. On the occasion, I think it was a fee relating to 2019, or it came to 2019, a notice was served which enclosed 2 copies of an invoice, the one from 17, the one from 19. The invoice from 19 was paid. However, the notice was absolutely crystal clear that it was only payment of both invoices which would lift the suspension. Officers then attended the premises after 11 p.m. and observed the premises licence holder holding himself out as willing to supply late night refreshment, basically open after 11 p.m, which is a licensable activity. And as a result then decided to offer the licence holder a caution for that offence, and that was accepted. And the committee will know that cautions are only accepted, or are only able to be offered, where there is an admission of guilt and there's there's sufficient evidence to provide a realistic prospect of conviction. Both of those 2 tests were satisfied at the time, and so it's, in my opinion, it's erroneous to suggest that caution is unreliable.
Bearing in mind those facts that Mr. Housen has just said, are you going to continue this route of stating that the caution was for non-payment of fine?
If I may add to that point as well, that
I've asked the question.
It is accept, our client does accept the fact that there was an oversight in terms of one of the payments relating to the premises licence fee. However, when the invoices were sent and when kind of demands were made, he made concerted effort to kind of make those payments, which then lifted those sanctions.
I think you've kind of sidestepped the question, so I'm going to split it down to the points that Nathan has stated. So, do you accept that there was an outstanding fee for 2017?
That is accepted, yes.
Right. Do you accept that there was a suspension in place on the agreement that the fees would be paid and the suspension would be lifted?
Yes, that is accepted.
And do you agree that admittance of the fact that licensing activities were ongoing within the premises while the licence was suspended and that resulted in a caution?
Yes, it is accepted to a certain extent. However, arguably
Hang
at
on,
that
I'm
time,
not
yeah.
I'm just asking for simple questions, simple answers to simple
Well,
questions.
I just
So
do need to
you've
mention a
answered
point.
those. That the final question is, again, as Mr. Housen has stated, is that the caution was given after admittance of guilt. Do you accept that?
Yes,
Right. Okay, that's all I wanted to know for that thing. Nathan, your final questions, please.
We've heard that the two people who were in council on the day were friends and they were just there to eat food. Are there any other friends that Mr. Udin has that are allowed to attend the premises and eat food despite him running a business?
Would you like me to ask him that question? তোমার কেন বিজনেস কেন তুমি এমনি তোমার আইও মানুষ ফ্রেন্ড বন্ধু বা এই তারা
Oh,
খায়নি
yes, lot of English people come, just say, I don't know food. Every time,
But
they can ask anybody in the local area.
আর তোমার কোনো ফ্রেন্ড বা বন্ধু বা ফ্যামিলি ইয়া খায়নি না খান Yes, he does. He says yes. I do that all the time. Whether it's friends, that's often one of his responses was often there's there's kind of customers who come in and they don't have money and they say, "Can I take food?" And he'll let them take food. And there's a lot of friends as well and family members that attend and eat food at his premises, and there's no kind of remuneration for that.
Could you tell me when your busy times are, Mr. Udin? When's the business busy?
6 to 9.
Between 6 and 9.
Is that on any particular times or days or are you busy on a
এটা
day?
বদলেনি না
Sometime 6 to 9 business time every day.
সকল সময় নিরার সময় কয়েকটা
Sometime quite a lot.
So his response to that was that generally it kind of varies between 6 and 9, but the business can vary in terms of its peak operating business times. But it's kind of generally between 6 and 9. But often, sometimes it's very quiet as well, he said.
So are there any days which are busier than others?
Sometime Saturday busy.
He says sometimes Saturday is one of the busier days.
Okay. Is Friday a normal day or a busy day?
Someday Friday just normal.
He's saying that Fridays are normally a normal day.
So we've... Sorry, I'm not on there. So we've heard that you usually have 3 staff on duty. On this occasion, there was certainly you working at the premises, Mr. Udin, and there is the potential that this other person was working, Mr. Rahman. But usually there's 3 staff. Do you not think it's coincidental that when the officers attended, there was Mr. Udin in attendance and then 2 other people who just happened to be on the premises cooking their own food, but definitely not working, even though there's usually 3 staff on duty?
Yeah, I think in response to that question is that he's already clarified to you that Friday is a normal day. It's not one of his busiest days. He's already explained that 2 of his staff members who normally would have been operating weren't there, and as such he had a temporary member of staff in place. He felt as though that there was sufficient, it was sufficient for him and this other member of staff to operate that business that night, and therefore why it would be coincidental, that's just speculating, I would assume.
Okay, that's fine.
Just a follow-up question to that. Mr. Udin, do you advertise your business on several online apps?
Yeah, online yeah, advertise. Just Eat and Uber Eat.
Just Eat and Uber Eats. So you take Just Eat orders?
Just Eat and Rodal only. Yes.
Are they collection only or delivery?
Delivery driver होते नहीं है ये. He said it can be collection and it can be delivered as well by
Can be
the
delivered
drivers
as
of that company.
Of Just Eat?
Yes.
I've never known a Just Eat delivery driver in my life.
Yeah, yes. Just Eat Uber drivers. The how Just Eat and Uber operates now is that mostly the deliveries are collected by self-employed individuals who get a commission from Uber or Just Eat directly.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I know that's part of that's not disputed. I'd say that's normal in that for those drivers to do that.
Okay. Right. Anything further, Nathan?
No, I think that's all of my questions. Thank you.
Husband, do you want to come in before I bring in Ms. Sultana?
Yes, Chair. If I may just go through you, I just want to clarify. Mr. Uddin, just to confirm, how many years have you been in that business? 1995. And you've employed many people at the business since that time? Okay. So typically on a weekly basis, how many people would be working on the premises?
You want me to ask that question to him? He goes sometimes 3, sometimes 2, mostly 2.
Mostly 2. Okay. And would that involve a delivery driver working indoors as well?
Yeah, go on. Separate as it. He's saying he's got a separate delivery driver who doesn't work in the kitchen. He's not Asian.
Okay, so that delivery driver is not included as part of a kitchen staff?
No.
So on this particular night, you had a delivery driver who Mr. Uddin's claiming to be a worker who works in the kitchen, am I right?
Delivery saying that he did take one delivery that night as well.
No, that's not my question. My question relates to a delivery driver working in the premises, in the kitchen with Mr. Uddin, which is what Mr. Uddin is claiming. Because what the first question was does he have a delivery driver who is separate? He doesn't have anything to do with the kitchen. Well, on this occasion, you had a delivery driver who was working in the kitchen, which is what Mr. Uddin's claiming. Now, that brings back the question which you were referring to, is when Ms. Sultana mentioned that when spoken to the driver stated that he was a delivery driver, which you claimed wasn't a delivery driver, he was working in the kitchen. Am I right?
I think you need, to kind of clarify on that point, what Mr. Uddin is saying is that he does have a delivery driver as well who comes sometimes, okay? However, I think the point that you need to note here is that he's also saying that on that night, that specific delivery driver who's not Asian, the person that they spoke to outside, had finished his shift for the night.
But that's not what was said earlier on.
That wasn't asked.
No, that's
regarding
irrelevant. You were clarifying the actual position of that delivery driver. Okay, leave it at that. Moving on from there.
But I think I need to kind of clarify on that because I think there's been confusion on your part as well.
There's no confusion, I'm just clarifying.
Just one meeting, please. Just for clarity, I think what your the crux of this is whether the individual outside that identified as a delivery driver at the time to officers is the same individual as Mr. Uden is saying is a delivery driver. That's the problem.
Yes, Chair.
And if that is a separate person than the individual outside, again, he doesn't appear on the evidence that we have been issued, and there is a question there. However, could you just clarify, and I think this is the point that you need, is the delivery driver that is employed, is that the person that was sat outside when immigration came, or is that a different person?
delivery driver good থাকে যেগো immigration officer বাড়া পাইছে. Okay, so in a nutshell, what he's saying is that the person that was identified outside is not the delivery driver that he's speaking about.
Right.
That's somebody else.
So there's another member of staff, again,
He go employed and not self-employed. And he's a company. Yeah. So I think that's one thing that needs to be kind of clarified as well.
I think that's clarified.
There's
a fifth member of staff somewhere.
No, the other delivery driver works on a self-employed basis for himself.
Okay.
Okay.
That's non-Asian, and that he's not on that list because he's not employed by him.
Go on.
Okay, Mr. Hussain. Okay, let's agree to that point. Okay. Can I just make it clear? Have you read agenda page 10? If I may draw your everyone's attention, Chair, on agenda page 10, Annex 2. Conditions consistent with the operating schedule. There will be a minimum of 3 staff on duty at all times. Okay. Sorry, Chair, if I may. Mr. Uddin is claiming that there's himself and a delivery driver working on the night. So if there was a delivery, which would only leave Mr. Uddin on the premises, which is 1, not 3. Okay, which is a breach of the condition of the premises licence, Chair. And if I may continue on that basis, previously asked questions were answered as there's usually 2 on the premises at all times. Okay, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Then we'll go to Ms. Sultana for any questions.
No questions from me, just mainly to reiterate, he mentioned that the males were just there eating food, but we did ask them the question and they have both stated that they were helping out.
Thank you. Right, can I ask the Nathan to sum up?
So I do apologise, Chair. Is it possible I could ask a
You were
couple
very
of
late
questions?
there, Alex.
I do apologise, Chair.
Go on, quickly.
Question for Mr. Udin. The 2 gentlemen who were his guests, how did the invitation come about?
Bize duymalı şaflar guest হিসাবে আইসিলেন তারা আইলো কিলা মানে তারা তুমি তারা ফোন কইরা কইছিলেন আও আমার দেখা করো ইয়া না তারা মিলাইছে. He's saying that it wasn't an invitation where he directly called them to come over. They just come.
Did he know them before the night of the visit?
Yes, he does. He knows them from before.
In what capacity?
He knows them from Bangladesh, and he also knows them from here as well.
Right. And was that the first time that they turned up to be fed?
No, he's saying they've been before as well.
Before the visit, had they eaten or were they yet to eat?
Before the visit?
Yeah.
Before the enforcement visit?
Yeah, I mean, had they had the meal before the enforcement visit, or was that?
What he's saying is that they'd just eaten and they just sat down, and that's when the enforcement took place.
Yeah. I mean, did Mr. Udin not find it a bit strange that they'd had a meal as his guests wearing aprons?
So what he's saying is that even though as guests, they were making the food for themselves.
All right. I mean, is that not a bit odd? Because normally, isn't it the case that you make food for your guests?
He's saying that, look, I was there at the time on my own at that specific time, and they just decided to make their own food, and that's about it. There's no other explanation to that.
And there's been a lot of confusion about how many employees there were and who was outside. Is my recollection not right that you were saying that the person outside who couldn't gain entry was a sous chef, not a delivery driver?
Yeah, so he's saying that, look, he attended on that day on a temporary basis, and he was working inside, and he was assisting him operating the takeaway on that night.
But was it not said by Mr. Eden that the sous chef could not gain admission to the premises because immigration enforcement wouldn't allow him in?
He said previous to that, he's worked for him, this individual gentleman that we're speaking about 4 years ago, for 4 years previously, and he knows cooking himself as well.
But a few minutes ago it was said that the person outside in the car was a delivery driver.
No, what he said was that he did do a delivery that night, one delivery that night.
Just
It
one
was
delivery.
only what the immigration officers were saying, that he was working in the capacity of a delivery driver. But what he was saying, that he did one delivery that night, he was attempting to get back into the premises, but he wasn't able to do so.
And was he the sous chef to which he referred much earlier in this hearing?
The sous chef that he was generalising as the person who was assisting him, yes. It's common within the restaurant and the Indian catering industry to kind of generalise the tandoori chef, the second chef, the assistant as sous chefs, and that's how he was trying to describe what his role was within the kitchen area. Because he knew how to cook from before, he considered himself, or he considered him to be in the capacity of a sous chef.
Okay, thank you, Chair. No more questions.
Thank you. Try for a third time, Nathan, shall we?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I've only got a few brief points to sum up, really. We've heard a lot about the decision not to issue a civil penalty, and I think that's an important consideration, and it's necessary for the committee to take that into account when coming to the decision. But it's not the only consideration. The Home Office is entitled to decide whether or not to issue a civil penalty in the same way that the committee is entitled to decide whether or not, on the balance of probabilities, there is sufficient evidence to consider that those two people were working at the premises. And I think this hearing will hinge on that consideration as to whether you find there is sufficient evidence to, as I would suggest, that those people were working. If you do find that those two people were working at the premises, the licensing objectives are clearly engaged, and you must take such action is appropriate to promote the licensing objectives. And taking that word must, as has been discussed previously in the hearing, you must have regard to the Section 182 guidance, which in this case, and I'm going to quote directly from that guidance, certain criminal activity should be treated particularly seriously, e.g., and it gives a list of different things which should be considered particularly serious. One of those is the use of a licensed premises for employing a person who is disqualified from working in the United Kingdom. It's expected that revocation of the licence, even in the first instance, should be seriously considered. That's a direct quote from the statutory guidance that you must take account of when deciding this hearing. And so that's your starting point, that if you consider the two people to have, if you find on the balance of probabilities that the two people were working at the premises, the starting point is that revocation should be seriously considered. Now, given the aggravating factor that there's a previous overstayer who's been arrested at the premises, whether or not that person was working is up for discussion. And in addition to that, a licensing offence having been omitted at the premises and a caution having been accepted by the premises licence holder, I'd invite the committee to apply what the guidance says and revoke the licence. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. You don't wish to sum up, do you? Thank you. Ms Sultana, would you like to make your final comments?
Nothing from me, thank you.
Super, thank you. Mr Mohammed, any final comments?
Just finally, sorry. Sorry, I do apologise. Just finally, I think I would ask the committee members to kind of consider the facts that's been presented today, and then ultimately I would say that it hinges on the fact that whether Mr Uddin was employing staff, illegal staff at the premises on that day. And going back onto one of the points that Mr Garza made was that one of the conditions is that there must be a minimum of 3 staff. Looking at Annex 1, it also mentions that there are no mandatory conditions. So this point that he made in relation to the number of staff that needs to be employed at all times, again, it's not a mandatory condition, but it's accepted that, yes, it's part of the operating schedule. Mr Uddin has always maintained and will continue to maintain that he hasn't employed any illegal staff. And if it is found that there has been certain shortcomings in terms of Mr Uddin's operation, then he would take that drastic action to kind of ensure that those are followed and adequate measures are put in place to ensure that the primary objectives of the licensing objectives are met moving forward.
Thank you.
Can I just respond on just a very fine point of law? It's in relation to the mandatory conditions thing. There are mandatory conditions which are specified by the Secretary of State. They are applied to every licence. They would be contained at Annex 1. Annex 2 is completely separate to that. Any condition of a licence must be complied with. It's a breach of the Licensing Act to fail to comply with that condition. So I just wanted to clarify that it is mandatory to comply with every condition of a licence.
No. Happy? Right. The hearing is now finished. Please can I ask for our officers, the applicant for review, the licence holder, legal representative